It's been a wild ride as we've brought you over 250 episodes featuring over 5,000 Teslacam videos. Buckle up and enjoy this special collection of the most viewed Teslacam videos we've published so far in 2024. Jason entered an intersection on a green light when another driver ran their red light and T-boned his Tesla at full speed. Jason made sure everyone was okay. Thankfully, there were no serious injuries. The other car was full of distracted teens who all started claiming that Jason had run a red light. The police arrived quickly at the collision scene. Instead of arguing with the teens, Jason showed his Teslacam footage to the officers and they quickly determined that the other driver was completely at fault. Jason's Model 3 was deemed a total loss, and he's in the process of purchasing another Tesla. Jason also mentioned that, for some reason, the side airbags on the Tesla didn't deploy. He tried reaching out to Tesla, but they said they'd only investigate if he had the car towed to a Tesla service center. His insurance provider towed the car to a junkyard instead, and since he wasn't hurt, he decided not to pursue it any further. He still wonders if the airbags failed or if the car intentionally didn't deploy them. What do you think? Let us know in a comment. Summer was heading to work in the express lane of I-77 in Charlotte, North Carolina when, all of a sudden, she heard tires screeching before a truck swerved into her lane sideways. Summer hit the brakes, but had nowhere to go but straight, colliding directly into the truck's door. Everyone was okay, but Summer told us it happened so fast she didn't even know exactly what had happened. She was incredibly grateful for her Teslacam footage, which she provided to the responding police and the insurance companies. Summer received a claim notification from the other driver the same day, and a few days later, she was notified that her Tesla had been totaled. Summer told us without a doubt that she'll be buying another Tesla as they're amazing cars with awesome tech. When the light turned green, Glenn started across the intersection. At the same time, a pickup truck pulling a trailer ran the opposing red left turn light from the far right lane. Glenn tried to stop, but the truck and trailer collided with the front of his Tesla Model X. The car shut down after the impact, so Glenn couldn't put the car into drive or reverse to get out of the intersection. Another driver stopped and walked over to Glenn to inform him that he'd caught the whole thing on his dash cam. The guy had been driving behind the truck driver, and when they entered the intersection, the truck driver turned across two lanes to make a left turn against a red light. This is the first time we've had the same incident captured by both a Teslacam and a dash cam. With all that video evidence, we're sure there was no debating who was at fault. The initial repair estimate was $9,000 US, but after an in-depth inspection, the final assessment came to over $19,000. Glenn is hopeful he'll get the car back this month. Norok was driving his Model S southbound on I-75 in Atlanta, Georgia, when he noticed a red Mitsubishi coming up behind him fast. After coming within inches of Norok's Tesla, the Mitsubishi driver swerved to avoid a collision and lost control. The Mitsubishi driver spun in front of Norok before smashing into a Nissan in the right lane. Both vehicles then crashed into a concrete barrier. Norok stopped and checked on both drivers after the Mitsubishi rolled upside down. Thankfully, both drivers were fine and able to walk away unscathed. The police quickly responded to the scene, and they were thankful when Norok gave them a copy of his Teslacam footage. Norok told us he's not happy that the collision happened, but he is thankful his own car wasn't involved. Lewis had parked his Model 3 on a New York City street when a crazy crash activated his Sentry mode. The driver of a Toyota evidently thought a school bus was driving too slowly and decided to overtake it. In the process, the Toyota clipped the front end of the bus and flipped onto its roof. What a takedown! By the time Lewis returned to his car, everything had been cleaned up, so he doesn't know anything else about what happened. It's actually kind of difficult to know exactly what caused the collision. It looks like the Toyota crossed a solid line while passing the bus. Then the bus moved to the left and the two vehicles made contact. Either that or the Toyota just got too close to the bus's mirror. Fidel had parked his Tesla on the street while visiting his mother's apartment, where there's usually no off-street parking available. The driver of a Dodge pickup hit Fidel's Model Y from behind before fleeing the scene. Fidel woke up the next morning to find a bunch of notifications on his Tesla app, and when he walked outside to check on his car, he was devastated. He filed a police report, but since the pickup's license plate number isn't visible in the Teslacam footage, he still hasn't heard anything back. The repairs cost $27,000 and took 2 months to complete. Mike was driving his Tesla Model 3 in Mobile, Alabama when an SUV suddenly darted out in front of him. Mike told us autopilot started braking before he could get his foot on the pedal, but he still T-boned the Toyota, shoving it off the road. The other driver said it was Mike's fault and that he'd failed to stop at a stop sign, but Mike hadn't seen any stop sign. The other driver insisted that he remembered a stop sign being there that Mike should have stopped for. When they walked over to look for it, they discovered it had been taken down. They found the stop sign lying in the grass. This story demonstrates that you should never relax when driving, even on familiar roads. The police were summoned to the scene, and since the stop sign had been lying down on the job, Mike wasn't given a traffic citation. Both parties filed insurance claims, and repairs totaled over $24,000. Leo had just gotten his Model Y and told us it's the first new car he's ever had, and he worked a lot of overtime to be able to afford it. Watch what happened while he was on duty as a firefighter. He was parked in the lot in front of his fire station when a car pulled up and 2 guys jumped out armed with a rock. They threw the rock at the Tesla's window. Thanks to the double pane glass, it didn't break. The rock just bounced off the car, but the alarm was triggered, sending the 2 guys running home to their mommies. Leo's window now has 2 2-inch long cracks in it, so he's filed a police report. Replacing the window will cost $300. Pierre was driving his Model X home after dinner with his wife in Madison, Wisconsin, when they suddenly heard a loud bang to their right. That's when Pierre noticed a car had run into a utility pole. It seems like the driver might have been distracted. Because of where the collision had occurred, they weren't able to go back and see if everyone was okay. Chuck was driving his Model Y when a young boy dashed into the street from between 2 parked cars. The boy crouched down but wasn't hit by Chuck's Tesla. He told us Tesla's amazing technology saved the boy's life. Chuck slammed on the brakes as soon as he saw the boy, but felt the car react and brake before he did, and a hard braking event was recorded. In the left repeater camera, the boy's father can be seen across the street and behind the Tesla. Chuck and his friends stopped and talked with them and made sure everyone was okay. This actually happened on Chuck's birthday. We can only imagine how grateful Chuck was for his Tesla's emergency braking that day. Mala was 6 months pregnant and heading home at 4:30 a.m. after dropping her husband off at the airport. She was waiting at a traffic light less than a mile from her house when her Tesla Model 3 was suddenly rear-ended. Both Mala and her baby were fine. Police and paramedics responded quickly to the scene. Mala was able to show her Teslacam footage to the responding police officer, demonstrating how the Honda had drifted into her lane, hit the back end of her Tesla at full speed, then flipped over before landing right side up. Mala remembered passing the same Honda when she'd taken the highway exit a couple of minutes prior to the collision when the Honda had stopped right in the middle of the exit. When the Honda sped up and began following her, Mala noticed it swerving in and out of lanes, and she assumed the driver was under the influence. At the time of the collision, the driver behind her was also in a Tesla, and that driver told the police that he'd been following her and also thought she was under the influence. Mala said that when the other driver got out of her vehicle and tried to approach her, Mala definitely thought she was under the influence of something. Her excuse was that she had fallen asleep behind the wheel. Sadly, the police officer took her word for it and not only didn't take Mala's statement, he didn't seem to conduct any investigation at all. The Honda driver walked herself to an ambulance and left the scene. Mala tried to find out why her statement, as well as those of other key witnesses, weren't taken and why no real investigation was conducted. The only answer she got was from another officer, who told her that since there were no fatalities, their policy is to only conduct a DUI investigation if they smell alcohol. Mala's Tesla Model 3 was totaled, and she hadn't even owned it for a full year. I think it's safe to say she'll be buying a new one after this one saved her life and the life of her unborn baby. Sean was sitting at a red light in North Ridgeville, Ohio, when a student truck driver effectively ran him over. The cops immediately cited the trucker after watching Sean's Teslacam video at the scene. Though the trucker's insurance provider still hasn't admitted fault, it'll be tough for them to fight the video evidence and the traffic citation for crossing the center line. Sadly, the student trucker had been taking his CDL exam, which he failed. The Tesla, which was valued at $41,000 was totaled. Sean has since taken delivery of a brand new 2023 Model 3 long range. Sung had just taken delivery of his brand new Model Y a few days before driving it to work and parking in his usual spot next to the building. Sung told us he's parked in the same spot for the past 5 years without any trouble, but of course, something was bound to happen as soon as he showed up in his dream car. He heard a loud bang while working in the building, then immediately noticed a Sentry mode notification pop up on his phone. Evidently, an elderly man leaving the parking structure across the street had hit the wrong pedal and smashed his vehicle into the left side of Sung's new Tesla. Nobody was hurt, but Sung's Model Y spent 2 months receiving $37,000 in repairs. Given the extent of the damage, he was surprised the insurance company didn't total the vehicle. Mohammed told us he was driving about 80 miles per hour when he tried to merge into the middle lane to pass a car in front of him. His Tesla began to hydroplane when he drove through some standing water. His Tesla fishtailed and spun 180 degrees before he effectively backed into a semi-truck in the right lane while still going about 80 miles per hour. Neither Mohammed nor the semi-truck driver were harmed in the collision. We're guessing the trucker barely felt the impact, but he still pulled over and stopped. The California Highway Patrol responded to the scene and wrote a report which Mohammed was able to include in his insurance claim. His Model 3 was deemed a total loss by his insurance provider after the repair quote came to $33,000, so they wrote him a check for the value of a new car. William sent us this video from when he was driving his Tesla Model 3 on I-15 in Farmington, Utah. A pickup truck pulling a travel trailer passed him on his left. Suddenly, the truck driver drifted into William's lane, almost hitting the sedan in front of him. The driver jerked back into his own lane, but lost control in the process, causing the trailer to start wobbling. William thinks the driver was distracted or sleepy, and he suspects he wasn't using an equalizer hitch. By the way, here's what you should do if your trailer starts to sway. Take your foot off the accelerator to start slowing down, but don't apply the brakes. Firmly grip the steering wheel, but avoid turning it. Be patient and wait for the sway to subside. We don't know if this driver did any of those things, but whatever they did, things didn't end well for the trailer. William told us it wasn't safe for him to stop, but he immediately called 911 and sent them his Teslacam footage. Neil was driving his Model 3 down a highway with full self-driving enabled. Traffic was building up, and the Tesla was slowing down to maintain a 3-car length follow distance. All of a sudden, he felt the car applying the brakes on its own and heard a loud beeping before the car suddenly lurched forward. The driver of a Toyota had rear-ended him at full speed. The collision investigation estimated the Toyota's speed was approximately 65 miles per hour at the moment of impact. The Tesla was hit so hard it was shoved forward into the guardrail. No airbags deployed since the impact came from the rear. Neil told us the driver's seat fell back, preventing him from launching forward into the steering wheel. His daughter was in the front passenger seat and she escaped with nothing more than some minor scratches. The Toyota driver was in shock, but thankfully she was uninjured. Sadly, she was also uninsured. Neil filed an insurance claim with his own insurance provider, and he was immediately notified that he was determined not to be at fault after they'd reviewed his Teslacam video. The Tesla had to be towed to a collision center so it could be evaluated to see if it's totaled. Neil is absolutely sure the Tesla's safety features are the reason why he and his daughter walked away without any serious injuries. If the car is determined to be totaled, he'll be replacing it with another Tesla. Neil wanted to say thanks to the off-duty police officer who stopped and helped them, and to the officer's son, an EMT, who also came by to see if they were injured. Jay was leaving work after a night shift and was bummed that he'd forgotten to leave his Tesla charging. He works at Tesla's gig in Nevada where they have free Tesla charging, but because he'd forgotten to charge, he ended up leaving about 15 seconds later than usual, since he had to walk to where he'd parked his car. As he was getting on I-80, the Jeep in front of him was cut off by a truck driver who decided to make a U-turn without waiting for a break in traffic. It looks like the Jeep didn't have enough time to brake and ended up T-boning the truck, sending it into a ditch. Though Jay was initially bummed out about not getting his free charge, after seeing the crash right in front of him, he was glad he'd left 15 seconds later because it could have very well been him in the place of that Jeep that morning. Garrick was driving his Model 3 in Sandy Springs, Georgia, when the driver of a white Honda in the left lane tried to avoid a vehicle stopped on the shoulder. In the process, the Honda got pretty close to the blue Dodge in front of Garrick, which prompted the Dodge driver to brake to a complete stop in the middle of the highway. Garrick was forced to stop as well, and after 3 to 4 seconds, his Tesla was Honda bumped at full highway speed. Everyone involved in the accident was okay. The Tesla's safety systems shut it down after the wreck, and it had to be towed away. The Honda driver was found 100% responsible. The Tesla was deemed a total loss after the repair estimate came to $37,000 US. The driver ahead of Hudson braked abruptly, forcing him to do the same. The driver of the minivan behind him didn't. Hudson saw that the minivan was going to rear-end his Tesla in his rearview mirror. Just before the impact, both he and his wife felt the seatbelts tighten. After the impact, the Model 3 applied emergency braking to keep it from hitting the vehicle ahead of it. Everyone involved was able to walk away without any serious injuries. Hudson's wife called the police, and they responded quickly. He showed one officer his Teslacam footage, and they wrote in the collision report that the minivan driver was at fault after following too closely. Hudson filed an insurance claim the next day, and the insurance provider covered all the damage and provided him with a rental car. The repairs took $10,000 US and 2 months to complete. Hudson told us he's grateful that his Tesla kept him and his wife safe. James had pulled off New Zealand's State Highway 1 to answer a phone call when the driver of a brand new Porsche lost control, hit a ditch, and went airborne before ending up in a field with airbag smoke rising. Several drivers stopped to help. Thankfully, the Porsche driver was able to walk away from the crash without any serious injuries. James, the Porsche driver, and the police reviewed his spectacular Teslacam footage after the police responded very quickly. The officers appreciated being able to see exactly how the incident had occurred. James later learned that the Porsche was written off, and the driver had been taken to the hospital after all as a precaution. The driver was very fortunate to strike the section of road where there was space to run off. If she'd landed anywhere else, she'd have hit the barrier and bounced back into oncoming traffic. Or maybe she wasn't so lucky. 2 days later, a new highway opened which bypasses this notoriously dangerous section. Sumit was driving his Model Y in Denver, Colorado. He was driving along at the speed limit of 35 miles per hour when he approached an intersection. His traffic light had been green for a full 4 seconds before he entered the intersection and felt a large impact from the side. The driver of a smart car ran their red light and T-boned Sumit's Tesla, sending it crashing into the Subaru on his left. The police responded, and the smart car driver— wait, is the driver smart or is the car smart? I mean, I guess in either case, the car definitely isn't smart now. Anyway, the driver of the smart car was found 100% responsible for the collision. When Sumit filed an insurance claim, it turned out the owner of the smart car was underinsured. Sumit's Tesla was deemed a total loss, and he's already ordered a brand new Model Y to replace it. I can hear some of you asking, what happens if you get in a collision with a driver who's underinsured? We'll tell you all about it later in the video. Thomas was driving a rented Model X in Houston, Texas, when an elderly driver ran a stop sign and T-boned the Tesla's driver's side. Thomas jumped out and made sure the other driver was fine. Thankfully, nobody had been hurt. All the Tesla's airbags deployed. Thomas told us this is actually his 3rd accident just this year. That might explain why he was driving a rental. Police responded, and they immediately found the other driver at fault. After watching the Teslacam footage, they said it made their investigation extremely simple by confirming their theory about what had happened. Sadly, the vehicle shut down after they'd viewed the footage, and only the left camera angle was saved to Thomas's hard drive. He hopes to find the other angles stored on the car's computer once it's been repaired. Some people think that rolling a Tesla Model Y is impossible, and we've never seen it happen until now. This Tesla was traveling down I-84 when the driver decided to take an exit. Somehow they missed the sign warning them to slow down and went into a sharp turn way too fast. The driver lost control and the Model Y went sliding through the grass before hitting a ditch and rolling over. The car was deemed a total loss and sold on an auction website, and that's where our submitter enters the picture. He works at a shipping company that helped a European buyer purchase and ship this Tesla to Eastern Europe. The submitter was able to extract the crash footage from the USB drive that was still in the car, and he also took these pictures. As far as he knows, the occupants of the Tesla weren't harmed in the wreck, but this story has another twist. The buyer in Eastern Europe actually bought more than one Tesla. Our next video shows another Tesla that was also totaled in a wreck. The driver was coming back from skiing and was driving down a mountain when an oncoming car lost control and started swerving before hitting the side of the Tesla. The car was deemed a total loss by the owner's insurance provider, so the car ended up on an auction site before being purchased by the same Eastern European buyer. Once again, our submitter is shipping the car, but this raises a question. Why would a buyer in Europe be after these two wrecked Teslas? We have no idea, so we asked our crash expert Winston if he had any theories regarding the economics of salvaging these two Teslas. Stick around to the end of the video to hear what he told us. Watch what the driver of a Ford F-150 suddenly did while Sampath was driving his Tesla Model 3 in an express lane. The Ford driver didn't notice traffic was slowing down, and in an attempt to avoid rear-ending another Tesla in front of him, he launched into the express lane and right into Sampath's Model 3. Sampath had nowhere to go and was crushed between the pickup truck and the concrete barrier. Thankfully, he was able to regain control and stop safely. Sampath's wife, who was 17 weeks pregnant at the time, was sitting on the passenger side. Thankfully, the Tesla kept both her and their baby completely safe. A police officer was actually a short distance behind them and witnessed the wreck himself. He immediately determined the pickup driver was at fault and helped direct traffic and summon tow trucks to the scene. The Model 3 was deemed a total loss, and Sampath immediately ordered a Tesla Model Y to replace it. Andy was stopping at a red light to make a U-turn after missing his exit when he noticed a red Model 3 pulling up next to him and a white Model 3 stopping behind it. Just as Andy glanced over at the driver of the red Tesla, he felt a large impact as his Tesla was shoved into it. The driver of a Kia Soul ran a red light, crashing into a Prius before striking Andy's Model 3. It then hit the red Tesla, so only one Tesla at that intersection escaped unscathed. The drivers all got out to assess the damage. They were all okay except for Andy, who began to experience neck pain. All the cars were also still drivable, except for Andy's, which had to be towed. The story only gets worse from here. Andy and the other Tesla driver both have the same insurance provider, but the Kia driver only had $25,000 in coverage. And Andy was worried that might not be enough to pay the combined repair costs. He was concerned he might have to file a claim with his own insurance provider to cover the difference. Thankfully, the other driver's insurance provider informed him that there shouldn't be any problem, as the initial repair estimate came to only $8,000. All good, right? Later that night, Andy got a phone notification that Sentry mode had been activated. Look what he discovered when he opened the live view. The body shop was lifting his car with a forklift. At first he was horrified, but then he saw that the forklift had some sort of wheel lift apparatus on it. He turned his phone back off and forgot about it. The next day, he went to the shop to retrieve his belongings from his car, and he discovered new damage to the bumper cover. Damage that is not visible in the picture he took at the collision scene. Andy doesn't know for sure where the damage came from, but one way or another, the car had been involved in a second collision. Andy feared the initial estimate of $8,000 would soon be updated to a much higher number, and he wasn't wrong. The updated estimate shot up to $39,000. Andy had to file a claim through his own insurance provider after all, and they declared the car a total loss. Just to add insult to injury, Andy was rear-ended just 5 days later while driving his other car, which made his neck pain much worse. Andy has hired an attorney and is hoping to receive compensation for his mounting medical bills. He can't help but think that if he hadn't missed his exit, none of this would have happened. Adam and his son were driving down a residential street in Napa, California when the driver of a pickup truck ran a stop sign and T-boned the driver's door of their Tesla Model 3. The impact was so powerful, it pushed the Tesla into 2 utility poles on the right side, one of which couldn't withstand the impact. The The left repeater camera stopped working at the moment of impact and doesn't show much, but we also have the footage from the left pillar camera and it shows everything. This is the first time we've ever shown video from a pillar camera on our channel, and that's because it isn't a normal part of the Teslacam feature. Along with the wide forward camera, the pillar cameras are normally only used for autopilot and safety features. But in the event of an accident, and if you've enabled the right settings, your Tesla will save the footage from those cameras too. In the state of California, and nowhere else as far as we know, Tesla will provide you with these recordings if you request them, which Adam did. Since all the doors were damaged, Adam and his son could only get out by climbing through one of the windows. While doing so, the driver who'd run the stop sign claimed that Adam took him out. Adam said the guy didn't ask if they were okay or even try to help them at all. Bystanders even told the guy to calm down because he wouldn't stop yelling. Police and firefighters responded, and Adam and his son were checked for injuries. Incredibly, they were perfectly fine. The other driver kept insisting that he'd stopped, but the police took Adam's side after seeing the video. Adam's wife works for the city. When he called her, she was too stressed to drive to the accident scene herself, so the city manager gave her a ride. Little did she know, the city manager was the former chief of police. When he arrived, the cops and firefighters started joking around, "Uh-oh, the boss is here." This brought a little levity to the whole situation, and as Adam puts it, he got a little instant cred with the first responders. Adam wants to thank Tesla Insurance for sorting everything out in a timely manner. The Tesla was deemed a total loss, and 2 weeks later, Adam has already taken delivery of a new Model 3. Benji was on his way to a car meet in his Tesla Model 3. He was in the leftmost lane when a 1999 Buick Regal came speeding up and passed him on the shoulder. The Buick broke the side view mirror and scraped the driver's side of the Tesla. Benji suspected the driver wouldn't be stopping, so he started pursuing him to get his license plate number and in the hopes that he might choose to pull over. What followed was one of the craziest car chases we've ever seen. Let's start the crash counter. Benji and the Buick sped down the highway on the shoulder, and their speeds kept getting higher and higher while the shoulder kept getting narrower and narrower. The Buick scraped the side of a pickup truck before sideswiping 2 SUVs. By this point, Benji was literally driving with 2 wheels on the center barrier. After making contact with the 2 SUVs, the Buick driver dove into the heavy traffic and started zigzagging between vehicles. The Buick then hit a Jeep before Benji lost control and crashed into a pickup truck and a Chevy Sonic. The impact put his Tesla into limp mode, forcing him to pull over. The chase was over and the Buick driver had gotten away, leaving Benji facing a bunch of angry drivers. Police arrived and began questioning Benji about what had happened. He told us that after he showed them this Teslacam footage, they decided he was in the wrong and he was cited for careless driving. 2 weeks later, after straightening everything out with his insurance provider, they sent an insurance adjuster to determine that the damage to his Tesla would cost over $21,000 to repair. This was the first time Jeff's wife ever drove their Tesla, and it was also the last time, as you're about to watch it get totaled. Rain was pouring down when she lost control and started hydroplaning. She tried to correct, but it was no use, and the Tesla ended up in a ditch. They'd sold her Prius only 2 days prior in anticipation of the delivery of a brand new one, and she'd hopped into their Tesla to run a quick errand. After 2 months in the shop, their insurance provider determined the car was a total loss. Insurance paid out $45,000, and Jeff replaced it with a Performance Model 3 with full self-driving just a couple of weeks ago. We told Jeff we hope his wife won't be totally afraid to drive the new Tesla after that wreck, which could have ended up much worse if the car had gone into oncoming lanes. Sadly, Jeff told us she won't be driving it. After discussing it with her, he thinks she might have caused the car to lose control after fighting against the lane assist feature, which she wasn't used to. She might have thought the car was losing control and steered against it, inadvertently breaking traction, but it's hard to know for sure. Hugo was traveling down a highway in Miami, Florida, when an SUV came speeding up behind him. The driver of the SUV tried to overtake another SUV in the middle lane. Instead, they lost control before crashing into Hugo's Tesla. Both drivers stopped on the shoulder and police quickly arrived at the scene. After an officer watched this footage, the other driver was cited for reckless driving. Hugo told us he was not looking forward to joining the Wham Bam submitter family. Hey, what does that mean? The collision we're about to see caused $26,000 in damage to a Tesla and baffled the police. 2 months later, they still can't decide who's at fault. Let's see if you can figure it out. Rain was driving his Model Y in Santa Monica. He was planning on making a left turn at an intersection and had stopped at the red light. When the light turned green, Rain began turning, but that's when a black Mercedes AMG came out of nowhere and T-boned him on the right side, spinning the Tesla 180 degrees. We need to back up. When Rain first approached the intersection, we can see a sign that reads, "Left turn, yield on green." Since Rain was making a left turn, that meant he should have yielded to oncoming traffic. But when the light turned green, the Prius in the oncoming lane wasn't moving, so Rain started to turn. That's when the Mercedes driver who approached from behind the Prius decided to overtake it in the bike lane. Rain couldn't have anticipated this, and since he was already turning, he had no way to avoid the impact. Here's where the investigation has hit a roadblock. Rain was supposed to yield for oncoming traffic, but does that rule apply to a driver breaking the law by driving in a bike lane? What do you think? If you were writing the collision report, who would you consider to be responsible? Rain told us he's still fighting with Tesla Insurance and waiting for a final decision, but he said they're waiting for the other driver's insurance provider and they are waiting for the police report. Andrew was sitting at a red light. Just out of frame to the right, a cop was running a speed trap to catch drivers coming down the main road too fast. Right then, the driver of a Mazda was coming in hot. Andrew told us the cop clocked the Mazda going 70 miles per hour in the 40 mile per hour zone just before the collision occurred. The driver of the Mazda said she'd been trying to get through the yellow light, but when she saw the cop car, she panicked and slammed on the accelerator instead of the brakes. The police officer came running over to help, but thankfully nobody was injured. Andrew made an insurance claim, but sadly the Mazda driver was uninsured. The local Tesla certified shop had a wait list over a year long. So Andrew had to take his Tesla to a BMW repair shop where fixing it still took 6 months. He said the insurance process was a nightmare when they refused to cover his $12,000 custom suspension and his $5,000 wrap. Not only that, they only paid for a rental for him for 20 days, even though he had to drive it for over 180 days. In the end, the whole ordeal actually cost Andrew money, even though all he'd done wrong was stop at a red light. At first, Andrew was really upset over the situation, especially considering it had happened on his only day off from work that month, and his entire family was visiting from Korea and was in the car when this happened. Now that he's had time to reflect, he's just glad they were all okay. Greg and his wife were on their way to lunch when traffic on the Dwight D. Eisenhower Expressway slowed to a crawl. That's when Greg noticed a Tesla Model 3 facing sideways on the highway, blocking traffic. Drivers were maneuvering around the Tesla when Greg noticed the Tesla owner, a shirtless man, waving and gesturing at the passing vehicles. Greg tried to stay out of the way like other drivers were doing, but when the shirtless man saw Greg's Tesla, he ran to block his car. Greg thinks he needed help with something and wanted him to stop. Greg tried to understand what he was asking for to see if he could assist him, but the shirtless man got frustrated and kicked Greg's car. Greg decided to try and get away from this person in any way possible. The shirtless man struck the side of the Tesla, making a loud thump on the glass, but Greg managed to escape. Greg later checked his car for any damage, but carried on with his day when he found none. He enjoyed lunch, excited knowing he'd experienced a wham bam moment that didn't involve his car being damaged. Austin was driving his Model 3 down I-10 in Bloomington, California when he was suddenly rear-ended by a Toyota Tundra. The California Highway Patrol was summoned to the scene after the Model 3 became immobilized, blocking all lanes. The CHP was able to push Austin's Tesla out of traffic before making a collision report, finding the Toyota driver responsible. The Toyota owner's insurance provider denied the claim since the driver wasn't authorized on the insurance policy. So Austin had to go through his own insurance provider and they totaled his car. They paid him $34,000, enough for Austin to make a sizable down payment on a new Model Y. James was driving his Model 3 on the highway in Battle Creek, Michigan. He and other drivers were obeying the speed limit, which had been temporarily lowered for a construction zone. Evidently, a truck driver thought James was driving too slowly, and when they got to the end of the construction zone, he merged into the passing lane to fly past James at well over the speed limit. With the construction zone behind him, James began accelerating back to the normal speed limit of 70 miles per hour. Before he'd finished passing James, the trucker merged back into the travel lane, hitting the driver's quarter panel and sending his Tesla spinning. After he'd spun a full 180 degrees, the semi-trailer hit one of the passenger side wheels, spinning the Tesla more and leaving it sideways on the left side of the road. The Tesla was still drivable, so James pulled off the road and stopped on the left shoulder, while the semi pulled over on the right shoulder a little farther down the road. James told us that he, his passengers, and even the trucker were all fine and not even bruised. The trucker claimed that James had been in his blind spot, which is interesting because if we can see the trucker's face in the Teslacam footage, he definitely should have been able to see the Tesla if he'd been paying attention. The police arrived 20 minutes later and immediately determined the trucker was at fault without even watching the footage. James started to drive home since he was pretty close already when the collision occurred, but after only a few seconds of driving, practically every warning and error message imaginable started popping up on his Tesla's screen. The Tesla ended up being totaled by James' insurance provider. Before GAP coverage, he received an insurance settlement of $39,000. GAP insurance is an optional auto insurance add-on that kicks in if your car is stolen or totaled in a collision. If your remaining loan amount is more than your insurance payout, GAP coverage pays the difference so you don't have any debt left over. James truly believes that if his car's center of gravity hadn't been so low, he would have flipped over while going 70 miles per hour and the collision would have been much worse. He's already ordered a new Tesla Model Y. Mia is an Uber driver who had just dropped off a passenger at a shopping center and was crossing an intersection to pick up another passenger from a store across the street. She was almost completely through the intersection when, at the last second, she noticed the grille of a semi-truck approaching her at full speed. Mia's life flashed before her eyes, and she told us she thought it was all over. She tried to swerve before the semi hit her, but the impact pushed her into a vehicle in the left turn lane. All her airbags deployed, and she opened her door almost immediately to escape the powder from the airbags, making it difficult for her to breathe. A healthcare worker witnessed the collision and was on scene within seconds, assessing her condition and calming her down. A witness to the collision came over from the opposite side of the intersection and started saying Mia had run a red light. She immediately hit the dashcam button on her Tesla several times to ensure the footage would be saved, as it was the only proof she had that her light had been green. Mia was transported to the hospital and later released with some sprains and deep tissue bruising. After getting home, Mia reviewed her Teslacam footage and discovered the trucker had made no attempt to stop. Mia thinks he must have been on his phone, as her light had been green for at least 6 seconds before the impact. Mia is convinced that if she'd been in any other vehicle, she might not be alive to tell her story. She's thankful to Tesla for building absolute tanks. On his way home from work, Chris accidentally drove through a red light before getting T-boned by a speeding Audi SQ7. Police responded to the scene. Amazingly, both drivers were able to walk away from the collision without serious injuries. Sadly, both vehicles were totaled, but what's really interesting is that both drivers were deemed to be responsible for the collision. The Audi driver was driving 15 miles over the speed limit at the time of the impact, and of course Chris had run a red light. Chris's insurance provider paid him a settlement of $52,000 for his totaled Tesla. Kenneth was driving his Model 3 in Santa Clarita, California when he was passed by two racing BMWs being driven by a father and his teenage son. The father, driving the Z4, collided with the rear of a stopped bus at about 65 miles per hour. The son, driving the 3 Series, was able to stop and avoid a collision. Responding deputies assumed the teenager had been driving the wrecked car, but the Teslacam clearly shows him getting out of the 3 Series. The deputies were amazed and grateful for the video evidence. The Z4 was clearly totaled, and 2 other vehicles were also heavily damaged. Trish was driving home when she heard a crash. When she checked her rearview mirror, she saw a car coming at her on 2 wheels. The Jeep tipped onto its side before sliding into the back of Trish's Tesla. She got out to check on the Jeep driver. Thankfully, he was fine. He turned out to be only 16 years old, and this was his first vehicle collision. It almost looked like he was going to save it. If he'd turned the wheel the other way, the car should have flipped back onto its wheels, but since the airbags had already deployed after the initial impact, we're guessing it was impossible for the driver to see what was going on. Trish wanted to shout out her son Max, who convinced her to send in her Teslacam video. Good work, Max. Thanks for the support. Trish filed a claim with the Jeep driver's insurance provider and is currently waiting for a repair estimate from Tesla. Alan was headed to his cabin in the Sequoia National Forest one evening. The forecasted low temperature was above freezing, and Alan still had summer tires on his Model S Plaid. He told us his Tesla never warned him about freezing conditions, but while he was coming around a bend, he hit a patch of ice and was sent sliding into the side of the mountain. The Tesla rolled onto its roof before righting itself. Less than 10 minutes later, it completely shut down, so even the heater was no longer running. It quickly became very cold, and there was no cell reception for miles in any direction. The wreck happened in a very remote area, and it was unlikely anyone would drive by, certainly not before daybreak. Thankfully, Alan was able to call for help on his satellite phone. It took a couple of hours for first responders to arrive. Thankfully, Alan only had minor cuts from glass and knives flying around and hitting his head. Where did the knives come from? Alan had been taking some dishes up to his cabin, and they were in boxes in his back seat. The impact sent them flying forward before they rolled around the car while it was rolling over. The responding highway patrol officer told Alan he was fortunate to hit the mountainside. If the ice patch had been on the prior curve, the car would have flown off the road and splashed down in the freezing cold Kern River below. The officer also told him that had happened the previous winter, and sadly, the family in that car didn't survive. The next day, Alan drove back to the scene of the wreck and found his car's air compressor that had been ripped off. He kept it as a souvenir and to remind him to be more careful while driving on mountain roads. The car was totaled after the repair bill exceeded $100,000 US. While Alan doesn't know if having all-season tires would have made a difference in this case, he made sure to get a set for his replacement vehicle, which is also a Model S Plaid. Good call, Alan. Eric was driving his Tesla Model S to work in Oldham County. He slammed on the brakes when traffic suddenly came to a stop, and the Toyota in front of him rear-ended another Toyota ahead of it. Eric also became involved in the pileup after he rear-ended the RAV4 in front of him, but the wreck wasn't over yet. A trucker swerved into Eric's lane and hit him from behind, pushing him into the vehicles in front of him. Eric isn't sure why the trucker didn't use the shoulder instead of swerving into a traffic lane. In total, 6 vehicles were involved in the collision, but the Tesla definitely took the brunt of the impact. Firefighters and paramedics responded first, followed by the police. Incredibly, nobody was hurt, but the damage done to the vehicles involved was severe. The Tesla was jammed between the semi-truck and the Jersey barrier, so the semi had to be moved sideways to extract the Tesla. Every lane of the highway was shut down while the police tried to escort 6 tow trucks to the scene to clear the vehicles off the road. The rims on Eric's Tesla were literally shattered by the force of the impact, and he feared his car wasn't going to be easily repaired. The Tesla was dragged onto a flatbed tow truck, and that's when Eric could finally see the full extent of the damage. The back end of the Tesla had been crushed by the semi, but somehow its structural integrity had still protected Eric from any injuries. His Tesla is most likely totaled, although Eric hasn't heard back from his insurance provider yet. He did hear back from the police when they sent him a copy of the police report. It's pretty interesting to see who the police found responsible for the whole thing. Alan was driving his Tesla early one morning during a downpour. The sun was also rising, and the reflection off the wet asphalt was extremely glaring. Suddenly, Alan noticed the vehicle ahead of him slowing down, so he also hit the brakes. Sadly, the driver behind him didn't see what was happening and rear-ended Alan's Tesla at full speed. It didn't stop there. The road glare was so bad, drivers continued rear-ending each other, eventually culminating in a 28-car pileup that got national news coverage. Incredibly, a police car was driving right behind the Buick that hit Alan's Tesla, and this helped prevent any other cars from crashing into them. Sadly, it didn't do much to prevent mayhem further behind them. Once Alan got home and saw the incident being covered on the news, he realized he'd been near the very front of the pileup. During the news report, he was able to spot his own car on the screen. There it is, right there. The interstate highway was shut down for 3 hours while response personnel cleared away the remains of 28 wrecked vehicles. Miraculously, nobody was injured. That's gotta be some kind of record. Allen's repair bill reached $41,000, but when he filed a claim with the Buick driver's insurance provider, they said the $25,000 policy wouldn't cover it. Not to mention the damage done to the 2 cars ahead of him. Allen's own insurance provider had to step in, and they totaled his Tesla. Christian's girlfriend was headed to work after borrowing his Model Y, but watch what happened right after she stopped for a red light. The driver of a red Nissan had fallen asleep at the wheel before crashing into her at full speed. Even though she had her foot on the brake pedal, the force of the impact pushed the Tesla forward and started a domino effect that involved 2 cars ahead of it as well. All the drivers were able to get out of their vehicles, which is a miracle considering the force of the impact. That's when the Nissan driver said they'd fallen asleep. Firefighters and paramedics responded, and Christian's girlfriend was the only driver who was injured in the collision. She was taken to the hospital with a broken pinky finger and is recovering just fine. They filed a claim with the Nissan driver's insurance provider. Christian hasn't received a repair estimate yet, but he's pretty sure his Model Y will be totaled. He wanted to shout out his girlfriend Grace for keeping her cool after the collision. Julian proceeded into an intersection when his light turned green, but so did a young driver on her phone before she T-boned the side of Julian's Model 3. The girl admitted she'd been on her phone and told Julian she'd seen a green light in her peripheral vision. The problem is that the light she'd seen had been for the turn lane, not for her. Law enforcement was quickly summoned by a school resource officer nearby. The police gave the other driver a citation for running a red light and causing a collision. Sadly, Julian's Tesla was totaled. He told us that even though losing his car made him sad, he's excited to replace it with a refreshed Model 3 Highland. This Model 3 owner was driving down a highway outside of Genoa, Italy when traffic slowed down as drivers passed through a toll station. A noisy, modified BMW in front of our submitter revved up as soon as it cleared the toll booth, but watch what happened next. The BMW driver lost control and collided with another car, then crashed into the barrier before bouncing back, finally stopping right in front of the car it had sideswiped. The victim was actually a student driver who'd been receiving a driving lesson from an instructor, and the vehicle was owned by the driving school. Now that's a driving lesson. Thankfully, nobody was injured. Everyone involved was able to immediately exit their vehicles. That's gotta be a rough way to experience your first vehicle collision. What do you think the driving instructor told the student after this happened? Give us your best guess in the comments and we'll send a Wham Bam hat to a randomly selected winner. Mamma mia! Hold on to your handlebars because this Tesla's about to wreck. Anthony was traveling down the right lane of a main road in his Model 3 Performance when the driver of a Dodge Caravan pulled out and made a wide turn toward the leftmost lane. The driver then changed his mind, ending up right where Anthony was headed. Anthony hit the brakes and swerved to the left, but he wasn't able to avoid colliding into the back of the Dodge. All the Tesla's airbags deployed. Workers from a nearby construction zone witnessed the collision and ran to help. Anthony called 911 and first responders arrived moments later. Thankfully, they didn't discover any injuries while assessing his condition. That just leaves one thing left to do. Determine who was at fault. Did Anthony cause the collision or the Dodge driver? The general was driving his Model Y to work with the full self-driving beta active when the driver of a white Model Y in front of him slammed on the brakes. FSD had plenty of distance and quickly reacted, slowing down to avoid a collision. Sadly, the driver of a red Model 3 following the general swerved into the express lane and collided with a silver Model S. Both of those vehicles then made contact with the general's Model Y. Incredibly, nobody was harmed, even after the Model 3 was sent airborne. Teslas really are built like tanks. Firefighters and law enforcement responded to the scene. The general's Model Y was still drivable, so the police released him after taking his statement and a copy of his Teslacam footage. The officer was pleased with the video and told the general it would make his job easier. That definitely seems to be the case, as the collision report was completed only 2 days later. The report stated the driver of the red Model 3 was fully responsible after making an unsafe lane change. Apparently, the driver had immediately admitted to his mistake and accepted liability. The footage from the white Model Y in front of the general has already already been widely spread on the internet, but we haven't been able to get a hold of the owner. If we can get in contact with any of the other Tesla owners, we'll update this story with their footage in a future episode. Until then, let's continue. MJ was driving his Tesla Model Y across a bridge near downtown Dallas. The full self-driving beta was enabled when a Mazda came up behind him at high speed. The driver of the Mazda lost control, overcorrected, then crashed into the back of the Tesla, effectively performing a pit maneuver at highway speed. MJ felt the Mazda impact his Tesla, and then he felt his car countersteer throughout the 180-degree spin, keeping itself stable. In his opinion, FSD Beta did a great job getting the vehicle under control and keeping the wreck from getting any worse. Thankfully, nobody was injured. Both drivers stopped and exchanged insurance information. With the help of the police, they safely moved off the bridge. MJ's repair bill came to $29,000, but that isn't the most expensive repair bill in this episode, so keep watching. Mel was driving to work on I-35 in Austin. He was in the exit lane when wham, then bam!
Teslacam, I hope you're satisfied.
The driver of a rental truck tried to squeeze between Mel's Tesla and the truck that was in front of him. The truck hit Mel's left fender and sent him into the concrete barrier with a reverse pit maneuver. The Tesla bounced off the barrier and headed back across the entire highway into the median barrier before the Tesla was damaged beyond drivability. With Mel now stranded, the rental truck kept right on going, leaving him behind. When Mel called 911, firefighters responded and so did paramedics, but the police never showed up. A tow truck came for Mel's Tesla before police arrived, but they did call him later. He gave them all the information about the truck, including the license plate number, but they never called him back. It's been over a month now, and Mel still hasn't heard back from the cops. He emailed the rental company a photo of their truck and an explanation of what happened, but they didn't respond either. With both U-Haul and the cops ghosting him, Mel does want to give the driver of the truck the benefit of the doubt and assume he didn't notice his large truck hitting Mel's Tesla. His car is still in the repair shop with an initial estimate of $14,000, but that might increase once they finally start working on it. Mel doesn't seem too upset about this, but we find it super frustrating. Why won't the police or U-Haul do something to hold the driver accountable? Eddie was driving his Tesla Model Y in Gurnee, Illinois, on a road with a 45-mile-per-hour speed limit when he stopped for a traffic light. Just as he stopped, he noticed something huge approaching in his rearview mirror. Ignoring both Eddie's Model Y and the red light, a semi plowed straight into the back of the SUV. Witnesses to the collision noticed fluid spilling from the truck, so they quickly pulled Eddie out of harm's way until first responders arrived a few minutes later. The truck was practically parked in the Tesla's back seat and had to be dragged out. Even though the Tesla had crumpled like an accordion, Eddie was able to walk away from the wreck without any serious injuries. Here's where the story takes a twist. The trucker told police that Eddie had cut in front of him, and he didn't have time to stop. The Teslacam video clearly shows the trucker didn't try to slow down or stop, and he was in for a shock when Eddie presented this footage as evidence of what had really happened. The police cited the trucker for failing to reduce speed, expired registration, and for not having insurance. Although Eddie was able to walk away from the crash, injuries appeared later, including whiplash and a sore shoulder, for which he's now receiving treatment. Eddie's insurance provider was very happy for the video evidence, and they also found the trucker responsible. They totaled the Tesla once the repair bill exceeded $41,000. Edwin had left his Tesla Model Y parked outside of his home in San Diego, California, when a guy walking past came up with a brilliant idea. He picked up a large rock and threw it into the Tesla before running away like a scared little boy. Edwin got a notification that his alarm had been triggered and ran out to find the rock lying in his car's back seat. Needless to say, it was not a pleasant discovery. Sadly, the coward responsible was long gone. Edwin called the police and made a report when officers responded. The initial repair bill is $3,000, but it might increase since the trim is scraped and the interior door panel is also damaged. If you recognize this criminal, send us a message or contact the San Diego Police Department. A delivery van blew through the red light and collided with Brett's Model 3 as well as a red Ford Focus. The delivery driver claimed he'd attempted to slow down and stop for the light, but witnesses claimed they'd seen and heard him speed up in an attempt to get through the intersection before the traffic with the green light had started moving. Maybe the delivery driver couldn't hear that himself, as Brett pointed out he got out of the van wearing earbuds. Not only is driving with earbuds against his employer's policy, in many places it's also illegal. Brett is waiting for the insurance company to evaluate his Tesla, but he thinks they'll probably total it. The Model 3's right camera was destroyed during the collision, so the red Ford Focus can't be seen in the Teslacam footage, but here's a look at the damage it sustained. Brett had only owned his Tesla for a little over a year, but he's thankful he was in a Tesla for this experience. He plans to buy a Model Y to replace it, which should cost about $37,000 after the federal tax credit. Lila was driving her Model Y down I-405 in Bothell, Washington, and rain was pouring down in rush hour traffic. She was driving at 65 miles per hour with the flow of traffic when the pickup in front of her swerved into the left lane without warning, revealing a traffic jam directly in front of her. Lila told us she couldn't swerve either way to avoid a collision because there were cars on both sides. So all she could do was hit the brakes before running into the Audi in front of her. Lila admits she was driving closer to the Jeep pickup than she should have been, but in her own defense, she told us that traffic will just cut in front of you on I-405 if you leave a gap any bigger than that. Nobody was injured, and Lila's phone called 911 as soon as it detected the collision. She then called her father to help her since she's only 16 years old and had never been involved in a collision before. We've gotta say, that's a spectacular wrap. If you know anything about it, let us know in the comments. Nico was waiting at a traffic light. When it turned green, he began to slowly enter the intersection. His light had been green for almost 5 seconds when a Honda driver blew through his red light and hit Nico head-on. Nico's Tesla lit up every error message you can think of, and his car refused to move. After the Honda rolled to a stop, it was down for the count as well. Nico checked on the Honda driver and found out she was unlicensed and uninsured. He notified the police, and the Honda driver was cited for driving without a license and for driving without insurance. All Nico could do was shake his head while imagining the jingle, "Jump in, Honda bumped." That makes this a perfect opportunity to show you our new merch for 2024. We've finally got Honda bump designs in stock, so go check them out. Carlos was driving his Tesla Model 3 home from work on what had been a normal day in Austin, Texas. As he drove down the I-35 on-ramp, he thought nothing of it when he merged in front of a white Mazda. Evidently, the Mazda driver was highly offended by Carlos's merge, kicking off some of the most reckless road rage we've ever seen on this channel. The temper tantrum you're about to see would end up causing a massive highway crash involving 7 vehicles. But you'll be shocked to find out what the police did after the dust had finally settled. As Carlos approached the end of the on-ramp, the white Mazda was closely tailgating his Tesla before the driver crossed a solid line and started driving on the shoulder. After spraying rocks and dirt everywhere, the Mazda driver merged onto the interstate before accelerating in an attempt to get ahead of Carlos before he had a chance to legally enter the highway. The Mazda driver's first attack was an attempt to push Carlos's Tesla out of his lane, invading so far that Carlos had to swerve to avoid being sideswiped. Up to this point, Carlos had no idea that he'd been engaged in vehicular combat, but this move from the Mazda driver was his first indicator that something was very wrong. Carlos kept his cool and continued merging to the left while the Mazda driver took to the rightmost lane in a bid to pass Carlos. Sadly for him, that lane was actually an exit lane filled with slower moving traffic, and the Mazda ended up getting stuck behind Carlos again. Once he saw his opportunity, the Mazda driver floored the gas pedal and cut across the entire highway to get in front of Carlos in the passing lane. The Mazda driver then brake-checked Carlos to the point that Carlos had to come to a complete stop, all during rush hour in the passing lane of an interstate highway. I bet you can guess what happened next. Traffic behind Carlos wasn't able to stop, and a chain reaction of mayhem began to unfold behind him. A total of 6 vehicles behind Carlos collided with each other before his Tesla was rear-ended by a Toyota. Predictably, the Mazda driver chose not to stick around. Thinking quickly, Carlos punched the juice pedal to pursue the Mazda. But as the other driver dove across traffic to reach an exit, Carlos remembered his Teslacam would have all the evidence he needed, and he pulled over. Police arrived quickly and closed I-35 down for over an hour. When Carlos showed them his Teslacam footage, which he assumed would be the critical evidence they needed to hold the Mazda driver responsible, they told him they probably wouldn't go after the other driver. Carlos asked, "How is it possible for a person to get off untouched after causing such mayhem?" Their response was that since the Mazda hadn't been involved in the actual collision, they likely wouldn't pursue the driver at all. If you thought that story was crazy, just keep watching. We've lined up even more insane stories from Tesla owners. Roll 'em! This submitter was driving his Cybertruck in San Pablo, California. You heard that right, this is our very first Cybertruck submission. In fact, we have 2 Cybertruck stories in today's episode, and both drivers experienced road rage attacks against their stainless steel pickup trucks. In this one, our submitter was headed to his daughter's birthday party and he was following traffic ahead of him in the HOV lane. Suddenly, the entitled rider of a Yamaha R6 motorcycle approached from behind. The biker was lane splitting, but evidently he wasn't happy that the large Cybertruck hadn't made room for him, as he had to slow down and wait before squeezing between the Cybertruck and the pickup next to it. The biker was so triggered, he punched the Cybertruck's side view mirror as he rode past it. By the way, lane splitting is legal in California, but there's no legal requirement for drivers to make room for motorcycles that are splitting lanes. In fact, in some cases, it's discouraged. Don't believe us? Be sure to comment without looking it up first. Even so, our submitter was already driving as close to the outside lane line as he could without breaking the law and crossing it, but evidently that wasn't good enough. In fact, the rider's feelings were so hurt, he felt the need to slap another vehicle's mirror up ahead. Poor baby. Our submitter kept his cool and continued to his daughter's birthday party, then called the California Highway Patrol to report the incident after returning home. The CHP suggested he give his Teslacam footage to the Oakland office, but when he did, they told him that there wasn't anything they could do since the video doesn't show the motorcycle's plate number. If you can identify the rider, his license plate, his tattoos, the bike stickers, or anything else relevant, your help would be appreciated. Just send us the information and we'll forward it along. I can't believe I finally get to say this, but roll the next Cybertruck video.